Thank you, Amy, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
so, for your first book, I understand that there was a bidding war between two publishers, and when it was published, the Joy Luck Club was an instant bestseller. So, looking back now, how did that feel?
It was pretty unreal because I didn't even know that my agent was going to New York to sell this. I had only three short stories that I'd written and an outline. And when she said she was going to do that, I thought, oh, she must be a fraud because there's no way that she could sell this to a New York publisher.
Yeah, I mean that was a complicated time in your life, right? You were working with as a corporate technical writer, I think.
I
And
was a business writer. It was, a lot of people think it's technical because the companies are technical, but I wrote things, everything from rah-rah motivational speeches to, training programs, corporate, kind of communications to people. And especially during divestiture of AT&T when they became, 11 operating companies. So yes, tech companies, but I was a business writer.
that's a really full life, right? 90 hours a week doing this other work, being a daughter, doing all of this work, and you were writing fiction, sort of at the margins of a busy life.
Yeah. I didn't love what I was doing. The business writing was great in one sense because it was freelance and I had these clients who were very kind to me. But I never had grown up thinking that I had a passion for telecommunications or account management with a big eight firm or anything like that. Um, and I started writing fiction as a way to give me something more meaningful, that I would be doing this, but without expectation. I did not need to make a living doing this. I could do it for the love of it and for what I was getting out of it which was a lot of realizations of who I was and how I became this way.
That's a really powerful perspective. I would imagine looking back. So I read that you had said that you felt compelled by a subconscious neediness to know, not a need to know, but a
Yeah,
neediness to know.
yeah,
I would love to
yeah.
have you help us unpack that a little bit. What did it mean?
Well, neediness is always there. It's perpetual. You're always starving for some kind of answer. But it really started in childhood because everything that happened to me, I would question. I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't question things. I thought it was normal for everybody to question. And perhaps I came from my father a bit, he was a minister and he questioned himself. Am I being good enough? I didn't question myself in quite that way, although I might say, well, who is this God and what does he think of me? And why does he think that? I would ask myself, why am I being treated this way? What did I do? If I intended to be good, but I'm perceived as bad, why is that? Or if somebody called me a racist name and I'm 6 years old and they say I'm a chink or worse, and I think, what makes me different? What is being Chinese? I would look at my leg. Is this a Chinese leg? If I eat too much Chinese food, will I become more Chinese? Um, so those are the early questions that have a lot to do with identity. I can look at those same questions from childhood
Mm.
and ask questions about who I was as a childhood or why we end up believing certain things based on what's told to us. My thing in life was not to believe, to ask the questions and find the answers myself.
So the Joylight Club hits the public, and your fame is astronomically increased. How did you cope as a writer to separate that kind of solitary introspection with all of this adoration?
I never dreamed what happened with this bestseller. I think I'm more realistic about who I am than most people. So what I did is I sat down and I wrote some. They were almost like 10 principles of my life.
Mm.
At the top of the list was family. It had to do with what's important, and the writing had to do with knowing the reasons I write, that they were very personal, very private, and that I shouldn't do something simply because it would might make me more famous. So for example, film, to not get sucked into something with the idea that the reward would come afterward. Everything had to be worthwhile in the moment that I was doing it. And in a way, it was because I did not trust success. It's something that is given to you. And if you expect it and it doesn't last, you could be destroyed by it. So I think I started off with grounding rules early, and it still was very difficult to me because I didn't want to believe it. And it took me about 7 months before I did think, well, maybe I can write the rest of my life. I remember telling my husband that and saying, I think this isn't going to go away. I might be able to make a living doing this.
Let's talk about why so many people love your books. To me, when I read your books, I said, "Oh my God, that's my mom, that's my family." So much of it echoed, but I'm wondering if it's really the particular of Asian American culture, or if it's the universal of the mother-daughter dynamic.
I have my reasons for writing, and a lot of it is discovering uh, how all of these events in my life, and even the events in my mother's life and my grandmother's life,
Mm.
has led to a transference of many elements, whether it's a way to deal with tragedy or turmoil. My mother, for example, became suicidal as a result of watching her mother kill herself. Fortunately, I didn't take on that quality, but I took on the need to make decisions and choices for myself, because that is the antidote, not to be pummeled by bad things that people foist on you or that naturally occur, but to realize and to take those choices. Now, I think that within my intentions for writing, that yes, it did involve a mother, the only mother I've had, who happens to be Chinese American and an immigrant. And so people identified with that. People had immigrant parents, Chinese or other. And people would identify being a daughter with a mother they didn't always get along with, or a mother whose daughter was not grateful for what they tried to pass on. And all of those emotional situations, emotional conflicts, I believe, are what people identified with and why they found the book relevant and wanted to read it.
Your mom have had a very difficult past in China. Tell us a little bit more about that.
My mother was, well, she was born in 1916, and her father died when she was quite young, 1919, during the pandemic. And her mother was left a widow with her and a younger son. In those days, they were pretty much at the mercy of whoever would take care of them. That would be my grandmother's brother, who was a cheapskate and also a drug addict. Later, would steal money from people. So it was, not a good situation for her. And my mother also was very pretty. Now you would think, well, that's an advantage. In a way, it was, but she was made to feel she was so beautiful that this was much of the value of who she was. And she ended up marrying, in a sort of arranged marriage, a pilot who turned out to be a very, very bad man, because everybody said, you were an orphan, basically, after her mother killed herself. She lived in the family, this wealthy family, for a long time, never felt she was part of it, and then got married off to this playboy, in essence, a pilot who was unfaithful from day one, brought his mistresses home. She had to endure this marriage. She had a son who died in her arms. She fell in love with my father, a very kind man. She endured going to jail. She came to the United States for love, and she now was nobody. As she lost her language, her ability to communicate, she became an invisible person, and that, of course, led her to become overwhelmed. Suddenly she was no longer quite as beautiful. She was looked at as not beautiful also because she was Chinese. Um, those are some of the complexities of her life, but what it also came across to me as were these warnings. You know, if you fall in love with somebody who treats you mean, you'll want to kill yourself.
Yeah.
On the same, by the same token, she'd say, be sure you have a good job, be a doctor, because that way, if you get married, and you don't have to get married, but if you get married and he treats you bad, you can leave because you have your own money. So it was that kind of thing that her experiences shaped me, not that I became exactly the person that she is, but the lessons gave me a way to see my life and what were the pieces that I wanted to take. I wanted to be strong. I didn't want to have regrets in my life. And that was a direct result of how my mother raised me.
Do you ever, Amy, feel pressured to be sort of the spokesperson for the Asian American community because of the high position that you have, in the writing world?
There are expectations, and I understand them, that if you are public, that you have the opportunity to speak for a larger number of people, especially in regards to social justice. I'm very careful, however, because there are people who think, what right does she have to represent us? And as we know, the AAPI community is not homogenous. We're many different peoples from many cultures, and we share some things in common. We are linked, but we have to keep that in mind. And I cannot speak for the whole AAPI communities. I can talk about, things that have to do with the needs or bringing awareness to the needs. Been working with some, or been part of organizations like the Asian Pacific Fund, or Family Service Agency, and they are people who serve populations that need additional help. So I'm aware of why the myth does not really hold up. And I can talk to that, or I can do campaigning for candidates who are AAPI, which I think is incredibly important. I can speak somewhat to racism, but I can't do everything. Also, in terms of time, so I try to be responsible,
Mm.
but I cannot assume I know everything, and I can't speak for everybody. I hope people understand that. I'm not trying to put myself out as some kind of expert.
So the AAPI hate crimes are definitely on the rise, right? Incidents of hate crimes against Asian Americans in the United States have been rising at an alarming rate since the pandemic. And there are recent horrific crimes in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and they've been widely publicized in the media. The killing of the 84-year-old Thai man in San Francisco,
Hmm.
and the mass shootings that has happened in Atlanta. Um, are you afraid when you leave the house?
No, I'm not really afraid physically. I don't fear that as much as what I might say to somebody if they were to direct an insult, a racist insult to me. Um, should I react? Should I ignore it? And I think you have to judge, because some of your reactions, if you were to counter it, could result in violence. You could be punched.
Yeah.
And so I do have to assess that. It's really interesting. I've received a lot of racist insults over the years on my Facebook page. And they're everything you can imagine, from the go back to where you come from. I could say Oakland, um, or you eat dogs, and I say, well, actually, my dogs are, as everybody knows, you know, are the light of my life. Um, but it does no good, to say these things, in part because they're not looking for rationalizations or rational answers. They they're going to continue to believe this. I had a whole slew of them just the other day because I had on Biden's Facebook page, I would say for certain measures that were really important to me, I'd say, thank you, President Biden, for embracing all cultures, or thank you, President Biden, for looking at how we can stop the insanity with weapons, killing a lot of people. And I would get 5,000 likes, but I would get 500 comments full of vitriol, a lot of them racist comments. I was going to write them down because we don't do enough in reporting
That's right.
what the hate comments are. We don't have a central clearinghouse. When people say there are 3,500 incidents of hate crimes against Asians, no, that is just a tiny amount of the number of hate crimes that are happening. And I just wish that we had a clearinghouse so that even if they're just hateful messages that don't accompany violence, you want to know if they're coming from a group of people who could erupt into violence.
Tell me about what it feels like to have a film crew follow you around, documenting your every move.
It is an intrusion of privacy, certainly, and it was one of the reasons I did not want to do a documentary. But Jamie, the director, James Redford, was a friend, and I absolutely trusted him. And when we did interviews, it was like talking to a friend, having intimate conversations about things that were important to both of us. Mm-hmm. So with those conversations, other people just kind of fell away. There were times when it was intrusive, but you have to keep in mind they kept the crew very, very small. So it was almost easy for them, except for the big camera, to fade away in the distance. Every now and then I wondered how they were going to use this footage, but I never asked to see it. I wanted to give Jamie the freedom to create the documentary he wanted. And I saw it for the first time in its completed form when it was almost finished. I found out later Jamie made that decision, was forced to make that decision because he was in failing health, and he gave that to me. I watched it, answered back immediately, and that was the last thing he read, my email, and he started the process of dying. He died a few days later. So, you think about the inconvenience of team following you around, you think about the intimacy of conversations with two friends. Totally made it worth it for me and for him to have that friendship and have it come out in a documentary.
You are such an amazing narrator, an amazing storyteller. What about teaching the next generation? What does that look like?
I've always resisted teaching. I thought being a published writer doesn't mean you have the credentials to teach. But having done the documentary, I started thinking what I've done is, in a way, talk about my life and see how it led up to this point of my becoming a certain kind of writer. And so when Masterclass, an online program, asked if I would do a class on writing, at first, as with the documentary, I said no. And then later I realized, no, I could talk about writing that has to do with emotional memory and imagination. And so that's what I've done. My class is about something I believe is relevant, especially to first-time novelists, first-time short story writers. And that is, you do draw from your past oftentimes and your childhood. It's just there brimming, waiting to get out. And I think that my class has a lot to do with looking at your past, your moments, and how this formulates the voice you have as a writer and how you create stories out of these situations and conflicts.
Well, I admire your humility. I admire your centeredness, and what an amazing journey you've had. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.